The dinner rush finally dies the way. It always does, not with a sigh, but with an exhausted surrender. Plates scrape. Glasses clink. The last laugh lingers like smoke, and then the room exhales and gets back to its ordinary, expensive business. My feet ache in the sensible shoes I stole from a thrift store. My back is a constant complaint I've learned to live with. I rub the soreness and tell myself, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Because that's what surviving feels like. Postponing rest until tomorrow is less brutal than admitting you can't keep up. People assume working a restaurant is simple. Move fast. Smile. Keep your hands steady. They don't know the small things that take pieces of you, the way your ribs tighten when a regular looks at you like you're a mistake. The way tips decide whether you buy groceries or go hungry for a week. I learned the rules the hard way. Keep your head down. Don't ask for anything you can't pay for. Be invisible, unless someone wants to look at you. Then someone says a name that makes the air in the room shift. Marcus. Our manager. Calls it out, like it's the start of a ceremony. Adrian Moretti's table needs to be perfect. It's the way he emphasizes the last word, as if perfection is a promise the room owes him. The name slides through the restaurant and lands heavy. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Forks freeze halfway to mouths. For a moment I pretend I'm adjusting a napkin. But I don't have to look up. Everyone knows who Adrian Moretti is. Everyone knows the kind of quiet weather that follows a name like that. He arrives like bad weather, and a blessing wrapped into a gust of autumn air. The smell of expensive cologne. The hush of men who don't have to raise their voices. He moves like he owns the space between seconds. People stand a fraction straighter when he passes. He's 35. Maybe. He wears the kind of suit that looks like it was made for a life that never has to bend. The men with him are silhouettes of menace. Cheap suits. And practiced smiles. And they orbit him like obedient satellites. I try to breathe steady as I arrange the last fork. The glass before me is sweating from being over-chilled. My hands are not steady. I am not steady. It's been 6 months since I moved here with one bag. 2 hostile weeks of subway rides. And a promise to myself I would not go back to where fear lived. I told myself I was brave. I told myself the bruises would fade. But some habits are stubborn. Like looking for a shadow that isn't there. He takes the table by the door. The seat that lets him survey everything, the street. The room. The entrance. I approach with a pitcher of water and a smile I wear. The way some people wear armor. Good evening. See ya. I'm Elena. I'll be your server tonight. My voice sounds thin in my own ears. He doesn't answer for a beat long enough for me to panic. Then he lifts his head and looks at me. I have looked at 1,000 faces and learned the shape of indifference. But his eyes are not indifferent. They are dark. Exact. And they cut straight through things you build to keep people away. For a moment, I feel as though I'm standing naked. Bring the wine. He says. Low as a bell. The 1998 Brunello. His voice is a velvet glove with iron inside. I nod and turn away. Relief like a tide pulling back. Then, someone in the next aisle shoves a chair back careless. Drunk. Normal. And my ankle twists on a stray floorboard. The tray tips. My stomach lurches the way it always does when I expect disaster. I reach to catch the falling plates, because habit is a muscle memory, and pride is a stubborn friend. I do not expect anyone to be there. I do not expect a hand to close around mine, steadying the wobble before it becomes a wreck. His hand is large, warm, and somehow, intrusive as a memory. The whole restaurant lurches toward us. Because a man like Adrian does not touch a waitress in public for sport. His fingers are firm at my wrist. He steadies the tray with the other hand, so easily, my breath catches. Careful. He murmurs by my ear. And it is like a small warning, and a promise all at once. This city can be cruel to soft hearts. His touch lingers long enough to make the skin on my arms remember that it's alive. I say thank you. Because what else do you say to a man who has changed the spin of your night? He watches me in a way that does not belong to strangers. When I duck my head, he asks, not with curiosity, but with possession, who did that to you? My fingers move to the fading bruise on my cheek, before my brain has the decency to think. I fumble for something casual, something plausible. I walked into a door. I say, it's the lie I've used most nights, for most things. He doesn't believe me. The set of his jaw tells me nothing I want to know. There's a quiet that comes after a predator thinks you are defenseless. For a woman who's learnt to read threats before they arrive. His attention is a new kind of danger. Not because he's cruel, but because he's so confident in being anything but. Men like him do not have to raise their voices to be heard. Their silence is louder than most people shouting. After the dinner winds down, and the table pays, I busy myself cleaning, wiping the spots where our transaction happened, until my hands sting. I tuck the business card away in my apron, because some generosity in this city comes with strings you don't want, but don't know how to untangle. The envelope's weight is more than money. It is intention. One night's tips multiplied into safety. Into leverage. Into a small currency of demand. When I get home, the rain has left the city smelling like someone else's laundry. My small studio is familiar in its poverty and its privacy. I am a creature of routines. 2 jobs. A kept mug. A crooked picture frame. I drop my bags. Touch the card. And for a beat, consider trashing it and pretending nothing happened. But curiosity is a hungry thing. I pull out my phone, because if the world sends you a hand, it usually wants something in return. The screen lights up with a message from an unknown number. Good evening. Elena. I trust you slept well. I don't repli. It might be a prank. Amistake. A new kind of menace. Then another message comes through. You shouldn't walk home alone at night. The hairs on my arms stand straight. My heart, which has learned to reside behind thick plaster and spare optimism, knocks hard against my ribs. I go to the window and look out. There's a black car parked across the street, 2 men inside. Engine idling. The city hums around them like an indifferent witness. The car is a punctuation mark that makes every past night feel like a warning. I should throw the card away. I should block the number and go back to my small, exhausted life. But I leave the card on the nightstand and sit on the edge of the bed and play the night back like it's film. His hand on my wrist. The way he said my name. The way the restaurant held its breath when he moved. That night, I don't sleep. I stare at the ceiling and try to tell myself the obvious truths. Protection does not equal possession. Kindness is not necessarily a trap. But when a name has power, the world rearranges. I imagine the black car's headlights carving the street into clean lines. I imagine the card burning a neat hole into the fabric of my life. Everything in me. The part that remembers running and not looking back. Tastes danger and instinctively wants to run. Everything in me that has been tired, lonely, and found small mercies in passing gestures, wants to take the edge of that hand and never let go. That was the night. Everything in my life began to blur safety, danger, fear, and something far worse, desire. They say the rain in the city cleanses things. I learned early that it only rearranges them. It washes grit into gutters and makes streetlights bleed into puddles. But it doesn't scrub out what's under your skin. It only makes whatever's already there more visible. Like bruised colours pulled into boldness. After the night at Luciano's, the city seemed determined to prove the point. Every street, a mirror. Every sidewalk, a confession. At first, it's small things. Adrian appears where I least expect him, and acts like coincidence invented his schedule. He's at the corner cafe, the morning after. Tall, in a simple coat, as if a man who owns half the blocks could be a fixture at a place that sells cheap espressos. He pays for the entire counter's round, and says please, and thank you to the barista, like he's training himself to be gentler than rumor suggests. He's polite in a way that makes people lower their guard. I don't. I move slower. Learn the difference between generosity and claim. Stay where you are. He tells the barista. She needs to sit. He doesn't ask. It's the tone of a man used to rearranging the world to suit his will. I consider slipping out the back. But curiosity is a more convincing thief than fear. And my bones are tired of running from things that don't deserve the fuel. When he smiles a small thing near his eyes, it is like a door opening in a house you were sure was locked forever. He follows me. It seems. With the inevitability of tide. At the deli on 12th, when I go for lunch. On my morning shift at the second job, when I pour coffee for queasy commuters. He leaves a note at the cafe. A single word. Call. I don't call. A day later, a car waits for me when I step out into weather, more oppressive than the warning inside me. My driver will wait. The message reads the first time he says it to me in person. He watches my hands fold into my coat pockets. You can say no, but I'll still worry. The way his worry sounds like ownership stings. It is both compliment and tether. I resist. I have to. Independence is not heroism for me. It is survival. I don't need someone to carry me. I tell him once. Trying for a lightness I don't feel. He tilts his head and the street listens. You're wrong. He says simply. You needed saving long before you met me. That isn't what I mean. But it is what he hears. And his response is that private kind of patience that makes fear feel foolish. And then the city pulls the next thread in my life. Taught Ryan. Ryan is the thing you never expect to find again. Until you do. He is the past's shadow. The rent you never paid on safety. I thought I'd left him behind in a motel room, and a one-way train ticket, and months of bruises that faded into stories. I learned to tell myself quietly. I thought I'd sealed that chapter, the way you wedge a broken book closed with duct tape, and hope no one opens it. Hope. It turns out. Is porous. He comes back like a rumor that insists on becoming news. A text from an old number, with a tone that is equal parts threat and nostalgia. A message that says I miss you, and a follow-up that says pay up or I tell. The secret he holds is a weapon with the name Anna, the friend who fell 3 years ago. He kept a ledger of shame and leverage. And he's decided now is the time his account is due. When I see him on my street, the outline of his shoulders by a trash bin, as if he belongs to the rot something gives. Panic is an animal I thought I'd domesticated. It breaks its leash, and runs. I take the long way home, and wonder if that counts for anything. It doesn't. That night he follows me. A figure that keeps time with my heartbeat. I feel him before I see him, the wrongness that wraps around your neck like cold silk. When he lunges in the alley, the metal glints like a promise. The world narrows to the flash of a blade, and the white of my own fear. I am fluent in flight. I practice it daily. But the alley is a dead end, and my feet have memories of their own. The knife finds the air where I was supposed to be, making threat into a sound I recognize as a sentence, and then there's movement from the dark. A man steps out and is suddenly very much not ordinary quiet in the way of cats and soldiers. He grabs Ryan by the collar, like he has been waiting for an invitation. Mr. Moretti said to stay close. The man says, and the name drops like a weight. Ryan sputters and scrabbles. He is no match for that precise, professional force. Panic loosens, and I realize I am shaking in more ways than one. Adrian appears from nowhere. Or perhaps everywhere. Threaded through the city, with the ease of someone who owns both the night and the morning. He looks at Ryan like the world is a ledger, and Ryan has misfiled himself under debt. There is fury on his face. Not showy. Not loud. but like a blade that has been oiled and is ready to be withdrawn. "You're bleeding," he says to me, as if the world's most dangerous man is the one who cares about the rag feel of blood against my palms. He's gentle when he takes me, and that is the worst part. He brings me to the car, as if moving me is the most natural thing in the world. At his house, the city becomes a reflection, glass and chrome, and precise lawns that look like chess pieces. The mansion is less a home than an argument. It insists on safety, the way a law insists on obedience. Guards pass like punctuation. The rooms are warm. The bed is not mine. And the taste of the pillowcase smells like other people's sleep, just for tonight. He tells me when I protest, "You'll be safe here." There's a syllable in the way he says safe. That is both promise and sentence. He brings a first aid kit, and his touch is practiced and private. Like someone who has handled both roses and knives. He cleans my wounds, and the domesticity of his actions feels like a negotiation, as if the act of caring is the first step toward purchase. I listen to the house breathe, and wonder which window has ears. Days inside his world are less like days, and more like careful experiments. He is gentle in the way the wealthy can be gentle with resources, and without consequence. Coded doors. Curtains that must be drawn by permission. Phone signals that die outside the gate. All of it is a map of limits. I am guided through halls, where portraits watch, and every comfort costs a loyalty I have not yet agreed to pay. He treats me with a tenderness that makes me suspect everything. Adrian is courteous with the servants, and curt with the men he calls, when a shadow moves, where no shadow should be. Women in his house have the practiced modesty of those who learned early how to exist around a man whose mood changes governments. They smile in ways that mask how much they owe, in silence. It's like watching a play, where every prop has both a use and a warning label. "You don't need to fear me, Elena," he says one night, sitting at the edge of the bed, like he has a right to be there. He traces a slow line across my knuckles, and I count the calls of my pulse. "You just need to understand me." It is not an invitation. It is a condition. To understand him is to accept that his kind of protection requires a surrender you don't bargain for. I ask him once, in a voice small as a folded paper, "Why me, when I saw that bruise?" He says, looking at the place on my face, where memory has etched itself into color, "I wanted to find the man who hurt you and end him." I laugh. A sound that tastes like salt and disbelief. "You don't even know me," he says, with an accuracy that ignores my sarcasm. I know enough. When a man like Adrian says he knows, it feels less like knowledge, and more like a verdict. There is no bargaining with the absolute. He doesn't simply collect information. He hoards lives like currency. He tells me things he has no right to know: my real name. The name I only use now, because the other was too heavy. The city where I left pieces of myself. The street where Ryan used to stand. And the night Anna fell. He speaks of the accident, like someone who has watched it happen on loop. He's in the city again, he says into the silence. The words come out cold. A predatory weather report. And I won't let him touch you ever again. The promise has edges. It is protection stitched with ownership. When he speaks, the line between savior and captor is not a line at all, but a smudge. A damp smudge on glass that makes the view ambiguous. I feel it in my limbs, like a new restraint. Unfamiliar and gilded. In the quiet of his mansion, with rain making gutter music below, I realize that safety can be a currency, and I have been sold a fortune. For the first time in years, the idea of never looking over my shoulder feels almost possible. For the first time in years, the price of that possibility is spoken aloud, and it sounds like a bargain. I can't refuse. The city outside keeps breathing its grey rhythms, indifferent to transactions that change lives. Adrian's house hums with a quiet that feels very much like a cage. I want to leave, And I want to stay. Those two truths fit together like hands in the dark. He watches me. And I watch back. The night settles between us like a treaty no one signed. The shape of my past is no longer a secret from him, but neither is the way his insistence feels like a promise. I am not sure I want to keep. The line between being saved and being taken is thinner than I thought. And when a man with that kind of certainty tells you he will protect you, you start to wonder who you were protecting yourself from all along. The rain had been a steady drum all night. A percussion building to something that felt inevitable. It smudged the city into watercolor, headlights bleeding into puddles. Neon, smeared into the gutter, and inside the closed restaurant, the world felt like it had been peeled down to its raw bones. The tables, still set from the night, were witnesses. The empty chairs held the echo of every conversation. It was the kind of silence that presses on the throat. They brought Ryan in like a man who'd been misplaced. He stumbled more from his own bravado than from the hands that held him. He had scratches along his cheek, a lip roughed up from a scuffle, and the look of someone who has enjoyed terrorizing more than he's feared consequence. When his eyes found mine, they were a mixture of triumph and sick affection, like he'd been waiting to see the color drain from me, and now, finally, he had his proof that I was still small enough to be scared, he began. Because that was what he wanted to be, the loudest animal in the room. You always thought you could outrun the truth. Elena. He spat. His voice scraped the air. You think a new name, and a city change. The thing you are, you killed her. You killed Anna. Any courage I'd patched together over the last weeks, scrabbled at the edges. The accusation felt like a cold hand on my neck. And for a moment, my breath snagged with the memory of months I'd sealed away. Anna's face floated in the periphery of my mind, her laugh. The way she chewed gum and stole fries. The night she reached for a railing that betrayed her. The thing that had been held over me for years had the shape and smell of betrayal. Adrian's voice cut through like a knife, finding its groove. Tell me the truth, he said. And when he said it, there was no softness left to hide behind. It was requirement. And it was final. There was a calm in him that matched the storm outside, terrifying because it suggested he had room in his chest, not just for rage, but for consequence. My whole life had been a study in small deceptions. I had learned how to lie, and where to hide the lies, so they would look like truths. I had learned how to make my pain unremarkable, so people would not ask questions. But under Adrian's stare, the armor I'd built started to clink. I felt the seams give and, for the first time since Anna's funeral, I let the words crawl out of me, like someone pushing through a narrow doorway. I told him about the nights that smelt like bleach and whiskey, about the way Ryan's hands turned, loving into ownership. I said Anna's name until it stopped being scary, and started being the thing I owed to the memory of a friend. I told them about the fight, about the balcony that had given like a rotten promise, about how I had tried and failed to catch her. I told them about the letter Ryan kept like a mortgage on my life, how he used it to make me send money to a box I barely remembered, the number of, how he'd said he'd make authorities care if I didn't comply. How he'd kept me small with threats that sounded like facts. The room hummed with the aftertaste of confession. Air filled the gaps where words had been. For a beat, no one moved. Outside, the rain tattooed a harder rhythm on the roof. Like a metronome, keeping time for the things we could not take back. Ryan's face was a shifting map of denial. He tried to laugh. To say it was performance. To say it had always been his story, and mine was a version he could edit. He produced the supposed proof, like a magician revealing a trick. The letter, the photos, the leverage he'd used for years. Adrian stood as though a switch had been thrown. It was the small things that said the most, the tightening at the back of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed, as if playing with an invisible weapon. What followed was brutal and swift. He moved with a speed that contradicted his composed facade. He closed the distance to Ryan like space was a courtesy he didn't owe. The room blurred into motion, one man's breath too short, another's hands a blur, and then Ryan was on the floor. Wind leaving him in ragged breaths. For a moment it was a silent, private thing between predator and bait. Adrian's hands curled around Ryan's collar, with a force that felt like a claim. He lifted him, as if to make a point. The room could not misunderstand. "You will not touch her again," Adrian said. Each word struck like a tally on a ledger. He hit with a kind of fury that is less about violence than correction, an attempt to redraw the line of what was allowed in his presence. Ryan's protest was a wet sound. He had always been loud when he had power, and softer when it bled away. "You can't," he tried. Adrian answered with a look that made him stop mid-plea. In that look was not just anger but a measured decision about what the consequence should be. I moved toward them, not out of bravery, but because something about him being on the ground made the scene feel unfinished. Adrian's hands were large and steady. He was a volcano beneath a mask of civility. "Enough," I said, and the sound of my own voice surprised me by its steadiness. "Don't become what he is." It was not only a plea for mercy for Ryan, but an instruction I thought he needed to hear himself. There are people whose rage is a mirror. We are allowed to decide not to match them. He paused, and the pause was an entire conversation. Rain hammered the glass while his silence filled the room. For a heartbeat, I thought we might tip into something unredeemable. Then Adrian released him. It was like daylight cracking the surface of a frozen lake. He straightened slowly, the bruise-sourced heat in his hands cooling. "Get him out of the city," he ordered. His voice no longer needed to be loud to be law. "Tonight? Forever." They dragged Ryan out like a bad memory, being shoved into the trunk of a car. The idea of him leaving felt unreal, like a myth we had conjured to prove safety was possible. The men who moved him were efficient and indifferent. And for a moment, I watched the horizon of my old fear narrow and then recede like a tide. When the echo of the car tires faded into the storm, the restaurant felt too big and then too small. Like a room that had been rearranged to make space for a future I had not consented to imagine. Adrian turned to me slowly. Rain washed his shoulders into a sheen, and something in his eyes that had been battered down to a softer metal looked at me with a strange, expansive focus. "You never have to thank me for keeping what's mine," he said. And when he brushed my cheek, it was as light and decisive as a signature. It was possessive. Yes. And it was not the naive kind of possessiveness you see in movies. It was a claim folded into an offer. My pulse fluttered like a bird fighting the wind. "I don't belong to anyone," I said, the echo of my own independence brittle and honest. "Not yet," he whispered. The word hung between us. It was a promise and a warning braided together. Outside, the rain thinned. Dawn was a rumor trying to become true. A pale line at the lip of the city. He stepped back and offered his hand like a man who had been waiting for my answer, as long as he had wanted to keep me safe. "Come home, Eleanor, and this time stay." My fingers hovered for a breath, tasting the decision. The old part of me that had been raised to move fast and keep her eyes on the exit wanted to pull back, to run toward the life of cracked sidewalks and borrowed rest. The other part, the part that had learned what safety felt like, on a mattress that didn't sink, and in rooms where you didn't count your footsteps, leaned forward. I thought of Anna, and the guilt that had been my chain. I thought of the bruise that had been the first awkward key to this whole thing. I thought of the nights I'd slept with one ear open, and the years I'd paid to make silence my currency. I thought of the way he had stopped the blade for me, of the way he had cleaned my hands as if mine were precious, and not a problem. In the end, I reached for his hand. It felt like surrender, and like choosing. His grip closed around mine, not to trap, but to include. The rain finally slowed to a hush, while the city began that slow ritual of waking. We walked out under a sky that was no longer only threat. My voice, in my head, recited a truth I hadn't been willing to own before. Some cages are made of iron. Some are made of promises that rattle softly like gold. I had traded one kind of prison for another. And for the first time in years, the lock clicked, and I did not cry. I gave him my freedom because, painfully and precisely, the cost of being free had been fear. He had stopped the fear. That was the bargain I made. He didn't steal my freedom. I told myself, as we stepped into the quiet dawn, I gave it to him, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. If this story pulled you in, if you felt her fear, his obsession, and that impossible choice between love and freedom, don't forget to let us know. Hit the like button if you want to see what happens next. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss the next chapter of our dark romance universe. Share this video with someone who loves stories where danger feels like desire. And tell me in the comments, do you think Elena truly found freedom? Or just a prettier cage? Your thoughts might inspire the next story.